here's a scenario that comes up a lot. How do you modify a design that was intended for a particular material to a different material with a different RI? And so if you never cut your own designs in GemCut Studio, what we're about to do now is invaluable in avoiding really bad surprises if you're going to be adapting designs to different materials. So while there are no absolutes, generally speaking, adapting a design that was intended for low RI to a higher RI material has a much higher chance of being successful than the other way around. That is, taking a design, say for very high RI, and trying to cut it in a low RI material. So let's go through some examples. We'll see the steps we need to take and the results we get. So the first step is to load up your design. So in this case, I'm going to load up my first design, which is this Trilliant. You'll see the design was intended for very low RI, so opal or even glass in this case. And we'll see it does quite well in that low RI. So that's the first step, loading your design. The second step is setting your target material. Do that, we'll open up the render view and select the material we want, or set the refractive index to the target one. So in this case, let's say we want to cut it in something higher like zircon, which is a 1.81. So I'm just going to remove the gem color just so we're comparing apples to apples here. If I close that out, and you'll notice the design performs really well. It's still very sparkly, still very bright. You'll also notice that none of the angles have changed. GemCut Studio doesn't automatically change angles when changing materials. The basic answer is there's no guaranteed safe way to do that, so that's left up to the user. And so that's the next step we'll do is once we've got the second step, which is setting our target RI, the next step is to optimize the design and make sure it still looks good. Now in this case, just by eye, I would tell you it looks good, but let's go through the steps anyway. So the last step is to run an optimizer, something like GemCut Studio's manual optimizer, and see if there's another set of angles that looks better for our design. So you might have something like a contrast pattern that looks more interesting to you, but to me, any of these would be acceptable. Maybe this last row here look a bit wonky with this sort of window outline, but you know, anything in this range here looks good. So I would say it would be safe to cut the design in the original angles, or you could pick another set and just have a slightly different result. So that's the easy case. All right, let's look at an example where we're doing the opposite. We'll take a design that was intended for high RI and see if we can cut it in a lower RI. So we'll load up this design here, and you can see it's intended for cubic zirconia, and its RI in the file is set to 2.16. So it looks good here. Let's see if we can adapt that down to something really low. So we've done the first step, load the design. Second step, expand the render and set the target RI. So let's just go right down and try to aim for quartz. Okay, so right away we'll see there's it looks like there's a little bit of windowing along the edges and quite a bit of head shadow concentrated in the middle. So let's see if we can improve that. First thing is I might just open this up again, go down and enable the separate window color just so we can really identify the zones for windowing. I've just got mine set to a really bright red. Right, so we've done the second step. We've set the target material. So now let's go and do the third step, which is optimizing. So we'll go into the tools, manual optimizer, and we'll have a look here, see if we can do better. Now, I'm not expecting miracles. I'm not expecting beautiful performance, but I am trying to look to close some of the windowed areas and maybe get rid of some of the concentrated head shadow in the middle. So right now we can see that going any lower on the pavilion is going to make us window down the middle, and we definitely don't want that. And going up is just going to make the windowing a lot worse. So we're very limited to how we can work. So we might just look at our crown options here. So in this case, maybe lowering the crown. If we look at our graph for performance here, the white line is our brightness and the orange line is our windowing. Right now our windowing is sort of an average high 30s, low 40, and brightness is somewhere mid 50s. So if we picked something like a more shallow crown, we see that the brightness has gone up a bit and the windowing has gone down a little bit. So comparing that one there, that's slightly better still. And we've also sort of dispersed some of that head shadow that was in the middle. Now these are small changes. There's no miracle. This design was intended for cubic zirconia and we're trying to cut it in quartz. You can see this one here is maybe a lot better. Now we might be sort of moving away from the intended kind of reflections with such a shallow crown, but you know, in this extreme case, this might be a good result, a good compromise. So let's say that was, you know, what we wanted. That was all right. So we can apply that. Now the angles are changed, and now you can print this out. And you'll see that our crown has come down. If I undo that, you can see that our crown has now gotten a lot more shallow. Redo. But we've got something maybe more acceptable in our low RI. Okay, let's look at another difficult example. So I will do the first step, which is to load the design I want to cut. Again, this design is intended for cubic zirconia. And let's try to cut it down in something lower. Now, so the first step is done. I've loaded my design. Second step, set my target material. I might not go as low as quartz this time, maybe something a little bit higher like topaz to give myself a chance. But right now it's looking like this middle star thing here is windowing. Let's just turn on windowing again to confirm. Yes, so that's definitely windowing down there, so we can't just cut it as is for these angles. Let's go into the third step, which is our manual optimizer, and see if we can't do better. Okay, so this doesn't look great because you know, unchanged, we're windowing down the middle. If we go any shallower on the pavilion, we're going to window even more right down the middle, so we can discount anything down here. But if we go up, we're still windowing in the middle, and then we're just actually adding windowing off the sides. So you've got to go to a pretty steep pavilion before we close that window in the middle, and by then we've got a huge window on the crown, which I don't know that we can actually fix. Yeah, so this isn't going to be good. Now, rather than trying to pick the least worst result here, I'm actually going to go back and see if we can find the cause of this. This little tear here on the pavilion is most likely the root cause of our problems. This is cut to a very shallow 34.16, and if we look at the critical angle for topaz, it's 38, so we're well below that. We were not even close to closing that off. So rather than trying to pick a set of angles that works okay, what I'm going to actually do is delete this tier. And so we've simplified the design. Now this isn't the original design anymore, but this has now closed that sort of window down the middle and gets us, well, I mean, something acceptable with the base set of angles now. But we can now go into the manual optimizer and see if we can find another set of angles that gives us a decent result. So we can see that this normal sort of 100% result is acceptable. We could go with a very a much lower crown and maybe get a bit of brightness back. Yeah, so a lower crown would give us more brightness. We've got to watch our angles, but we've got a little bit more room to play with. So in the case of a really extreme change, you might need to modify the design. So in this case, let's say I done both those steps and removed that tier and then chosen this lower crown. Let's just check my angles, nothing too crazy. So this might be the design I choose to cut in this case. But this kind of demonstrates that when you're starting from a high RI and going to a low RI, you're going to run into problems more often than if you're going from low RI trying to cut into high RI. So, but the basic steps are always the same. Load the design, set your target RI, and then optimize to an acceptable result. Now, what's acceptable is based on your eyes, and that's where the manual optimizer comes into play. So with these steps, choose your angles, print that copy out and cut that instead, and you'll avoid surprises.